So I'm hopefully going to give you a little bit of an introduction into what 3D bioprinting is and how we're leveraging it at J&J and what we're doing in my lab. Before we get into that, I want to give you an overview of what we're doing in general in the 3D space at J&J. There's been a lot of activity in this space recently, so I just want to share a little bit with you before we jump into bioprinting, and then I understand there's time for question and answer at the end. So hopefully this video works. Let's see. Perfect. All right, so you saw some of the facets of what we're working on. I'll go into a little bit more depth about some of the different technologies that we're working on. Let's see if I can advance this. Hopefully it won't play again. All right, let me do it the old-fashioned way. So J&J is a huge company, obviously, but part of the commitment at J&J is to reinvest in R&D. I'm sure you guys know this. So this is a slide folks may have seen before, but J&J has a tremendous commitment across all of the sectors, so consumer, pharma, and med device, to reinvest back into R&D. And advanced technologies like 3D printing and 3D bioprinting are where some of those investments are being made. Last year, the overall investment in technology in general was on the order of $12.2 billion, which is a huge number when you think about it in the grand scheme of things. Why is J&J investing so much in advanced technologies and technologies like 3D printing, bioprinting, digital surgery, robotics, ultra-personalization, AI, machine learning, the list goes on and on? Well, as you guys know, and the last year and a half has taught us, there are a lot of challenges in healthcare. We've got aging and vulnerable populations. We've got unique populations that we're starting to understand even better. There's a big focus on outcomes, also reimbursement, new healthcare challenges. I think COVID is teaching us that. More and more there's an emphasis on patient-specific care, so no longer are we making generalized patient-specific care decisions. We're actually honing in on ultra-personalized solutions. And then obviously reimbursement challenges. We're not just seeing this in the US, we're seeing this globally. So out of those challenges, we see numerous opportunities. And some of the spaces that we see opportunities in are, as I mentioned, robotics and digital surgery, predictive modeling, so AI, machine learning, not just for our R&D efforts, but even for our clinical efforts. Ultra-personalization, which I'll talk a little bit about, diagnostic tools, and then I'm a little bit biased, but I think the most important one, which is bioprinting, to regenerate rather than just repair. So for the longest time, medical device design and clinical interventions have been focused on repairing an issue or mechanically repairing an issue. And eventually that leads to the need to reoperate. And bioprinting really gives us the opportunity to regenerate some of that tissue and restore some of that function rather than simply repair it. So one of the other reasons why we're investing so heavily in technologies like this is because our patients are asking for it. Patients are more and more involved these days, in their health outcomes and their health journey, and they're demanding ultra personalization, they're demanding transparency, they're demanding access. And this is not just something that we want to bring to folks who live in larger communities, who have access to some of these large healthcare centers, but even remote areas. And now more than ever, it's an important feature to have, especially when we're thinking about things like socially distanced medicine, which I'm sure we've all experienced in the last year and a half, telehealth, telemedicine. How do you get some of these really unique treatments to patients in remote areas and remote locations? So as I mentioned, wanted to give everybody an overview of some of the platform technologies that we're working on at J&J in the 3D printing space. So I may be biased, but bioprinting is the one that excites me most. But as you guys may or may not know, we've got a team, so under the 3D printing organization at J&J, we've got a team that's focused on metals and ceramics. So a lot of the orthopedic devices, a lot of the 3D printed orthopedic devices that you've seen. We've got a team that's working on polymers, so advanced polymers, other natural biomaterials. We've got a team working on 3D printed pharmaceuticals. We've seen within the last 2 years or so FDA approval of 3D printed pharmaceutical devices. We have a team that's focused on sensors and electronics. My team, which is focused on bioprinting and tissue regen technologies. And then we've also got a point of care team. So essentially taking 3D printing out of a manufacturing environment and bringing it to a point of care facility. So this is just a little snapshot of some of what we've done recently in this space, publicly available. We've been working a lot in the orthopedic space. Orthopedics, as you guys know, lends itself quite nicely to 3D printing. And we've seen a lot of success in areas like the True Match bone cage, various spinal devices, et cetera. We also are working on various sensing technologies that we can pair with some of our Ethicon products. We're working in the pharmaceutical space, as I mentioned. Consumer health, obviously, a couple of years ago at CES, we debuted the Neutrogena Mask ID system, which is a 3D printed face mask that consumers can actually tailor to some of their healthcare needs. So if you've got an oily T-zone or if you've got cystic acne in a certain location, it will actually take a scan of your face and then print a personalized mask specifically for you. And then obviously in our vision care space, we're working a lot in the 3D printed area, specifically with surgical tools and other contact lens solutions. So one of the things you may or may not have heard of, obviously with COVID, J&J has been a big player in the vaccine space. But we also were leveraging our 3D capabilities to help out early on when the ventilator shortage was happening. So the 3D printing team, the team that I'm a part of, partnered with Prisma Health to actually 3D print and send at no cost to hospitals ventilator splitters that could be used for their patients. And so this is one thing that we're really proud of, that we were able to take the technology, quickly pivot it based on a global need, and then donate that to help our patients. So bioprinting, why you guys are here. What is 3D bioprinting and why is it important? So for those of you who are not familiar with bioprinting is a 3D printing enabled technology, so very much like the layer by layer deposition that you see with traditional 3D printing. But essentially we are attempting to recreate not just the mechanical form, but function of living tissue. So what we use as inks or substrates are often called bioinks. They're made from bioactive molecules, maybe living cells, hydrogels, alginates, different bio-friendly types of substrates. And then depending on what we're doing with the print in the end, whether it's cellular or acellular, whether it needs to mature, whether we printed stem cells in it or not, our post-processing, in essence, is maturation in a bioreactor. So there may be various functions that we need to carry out in those bioreactors as well, which is really important to the entire development process. So why are we so excited about bioprinting at J&J? Well, we feel that it allows us to take personalized medicine to the next level, which is ultra-personalized medicine. So as I mentioned, if we look at the clinical trajectory of how things have played out over time in terms of patient care, initially you have intuition-based medicine where you'll go into a doctor and the doctor, based on their experience, will tell you, okay, here's the treatment that I recommend based on your signs and symptoms and what you've reported to me. Then we graduated, obviously, to evidence-based medicine once we started having these clinical trials, large access to databases, where treatment can be based on generalized data. Then we obviously are now in the space of precision and personalized medicine, right? So we're making treatment decisions based on algorithms. We are using genetic profiles and footprints to predict where a patient might be in their healthcare journey. But that doesn't give us the full picture. It may give us the picture of what we think is happening, but not actually what is happening. And so bioprinting gives us the ability to make patient-specific constructs or even takes patient-specific cells and then reintroduce that in a healthy way into a patient. So as you can imagine, when we're making our prints, we can actually take cells from a patient, from a healthy sample, and print them into our prints and reimplant them in a patient eventually. Or we could take healthy cells, if there are no healthy cells available in the patient, healthy donor cells, and put them into a print. So what are the opportunities in bioprinting? Where are we playing in this space? Are we just looking at commercial product, or are we looking in other areas? The way that I like to explain this is it's twofold. So we are working on those product technologies, right? Those are the gold standard when you think of, printing skin tissue or printing a piece of bone or printing some sort of scaffold that'll eventually go into a patient. So these are the technologies that regenerate rather than simply replace the mechanical function. So these are the treatments that'll shift treatment paradigms. And those are well on their way towards commercialization, but there's still some work to be done. So from a regulatory perspective, many regulators don't have a handle on how they're going to regulate some of these cellularized constructs. They're not quite well aware of how quality systems will look, how clinical product will look. So as we're moving there, we're also leveraging the other strength of bioprinting, which I like to call product supportive technologies or innovation accelerators. So these are model systems that we can produce through the use of bioprinting that allows us to develop our products faster, better, more tailored to our patients. For example, I'm going to keep going back to the COVID example. A lot of some of the treatments that were developed were done on organ-on-chip constructs. So you've seen these come out of Wake Forest. I think there was a New York Times piece on it in Wake Forest where they were using 3D bioprinting to print organs on a chip. They were extracting cells from COVID patients, and they were screening a number of treatments that potentially could help this patient. And as we know, every patient's journey is different. So what these folks were doing, what this research group was doing, was essentially using patient information and patient-specific cells to better understand this patient's journey and what might work in this aspect. We've seen this in Korea, we've seen this in other countries. Another thing that we're doing is we're using bioprinting to create surrogate tissues to reduce reliance on animal testing. So as you guys know, animal models are a great surrogate for the human model, but not perfect. They may replicate a specific mechanism, but not the entirety of mechanisms. And so through bioprinting, we can create specific tissues on demand. We can say, we want a tissue that mimics this pathology. We want a tissue that mimics this age or this disease or this progression of the disease. And so by doing that, we can get better samples to test some of our treatments, some of our devices on. And then obviously improved in vivo modeling capabilities. So the ability to expand our R&D testing repertoire. So if you think about it, a lot of R&D testing is done on surrogate models. So for example, in the pharma space, we're testing on two-dimensional tissue models as opposed to three-dimensional models. And when you think of some of these diseases that are dependent on the three-dimensional infrastructure of what cells are being exposed to, you can't always elucidate every single mechanism that may be contributing to the overall disease progression. So the thing I like about the product supportive technologies is they're in addition to the normal product testing that you do to get something on the market. So what's really nice is we don't need to wait for regulatory infrastructure to leverage the power of bioprinting here to accelerate our pipelines. This is in addition to the normal testing that we're doing. We're providing regulators better data to make more informed decisions about. So how are we using bioprinting to change the trajectory of health for humanity? That's a huge thing at J&J. is to change the trajectory of health for humanity. Well, essentially, it's a three-pronged approach. We're focusing on disruptive innovation. We're looking, so bioprinting, much like 3D printing, is not just a printing challenge or a design and engineering challenge, it's often a materials challenge as well. So we're looking at new materials, new processes, different products, new in vivo or in vitro models. Personalization, obviously, is a big one that I talked about. Through bioprinting and 3D printing, you have the opportunity to ultra-personalize constructs and make specific patient decisions based on their own data and sometimes even their own cells. And then access, which is providing this point of care delivery, being able to provide on-demand solution, being able to pivot really quickly like we did with the ventilator splitter, and then improving manufacturing speed and efficiency. So very often I get asked about what are the challenges and opportunities in this space, obviously. Regenerative medicine and creating surrogate tissues and all of that kind of stuff is something that hasn't been ubiquitous on the market. It's something that's not just new for the academic world or the commercial world, but also for regulatory infrastructures. So, clearly gaps currently exist in standards for regulating some of these types of products and devices. There is a concerted effort to get scientists and engineers and folks together to put some of these standards together, and they're starting to come out. We're starting to see them trickle through. Guidance documents, so obviously those standards will then beget guidance documents. But, in a lot of the guidance documents nowadays, regulators will refer to 3D printing and be pretty clear on the metals and polymer side, make reference to the fact that they're aware that things like bioprinting exist, but that's still a little ways away in terms of setting clear guidances. Being able to utilize fit-for-purpose regulatory frameworks, so depending on where you print the device, how you print the device, what goes in it, when, whether it's on demand, et cetera, those types of things need to be accounted for as well in these frameworks. Again, mentioning point of care, so manufacturing frameworks. How do you control quality systems when you're outside of a traditional manufacturing framework? So if you're to bring some of these technologies to a point of care facility, how do you control quality within a hospital? Obviously, scale and supply. So this is a big challenge for us in bioprinting because a lot of the materials that we use may be human or animal sourced, and obviously there's a limited supply, and with COVID, the supply is getting more and more scarce, so tissue donation from tissue banks, et cetera, has gone down dramatically because we don't have a full understanding of what's happening with the virus. So technologies like recombinant human proteins or engineered proteins, et cetera, are going to be critical to ensure that supply chain, reduce variability, bring costs down, et cetera. And then obviously data and intellectual property protection. I wouldn't be doing justice to the lawyers at J&J if I didn't mention that. But obviously a lot of these data-heavy infrastructures, there's going to need to be a framework to protect patient data, protect intellectual property, et cetera. So opportunities definitely exist, kind of the same challenge as opportunity model. Definitely there's an opportunity to work with regulators, and we've seen that a lot in this technology specifically. Regulators are reaching out to scientists and to industry saying, how are you developing this technology? What does your outlook look like? How can we best partner with you to prepare to accept this technology on the market? The other thing that we're looking towards is use of intelligent automation, maybe for manufacturing lines, artificial intelligence, not just for manufacturing lines, but for R&D purposes, and I'll give you a case study of what that might look like. Robotics, digital surgery, supply and delivery opportunities, as I mentioned, the recombinant opportunity. So one of the things that we're looking forward to, specifically on my team as well, but throughout J&J, is utilizing in silico modeling for iterative development. So as I mentioned, in silico modeling is huge right now. You can use it everything from advanced technology development through analyzing clinical trial data results. But when you think about something like bioprinting that has so many variables that goes into the equation, you could be iterating in a lab for 30 years. And that's very, very much like a lot of academics do, right? You could get stuck into one mechanism or one specific piece of that iterative pathway. But if you're driving towards the product cycle, you need to accelerate that. And so what we're essentially doing is we are taking the data that we're getting from a lot of the testing that we're doing, a lot of the prints, et cetera, and then feeding that into computational models and utilizing machine learning to then guide our next step. What are the appropriate types of materials? Which processes were the best? How were cells infiltrating, proliferating? How are they responding to scaffolds? Do different geometries affect cell behavior, affect cell survival, et cetera? So you can see that there's definitely a room to improve how we develop this technology, and we're very much looking forward to doing that in the near future. So what does the future hold for 3D bioprinting? Essentially, we believe it's a key enabling technology to really transform treatment paradigms. So as mentioned, there's all of these challenges, and how does bioprinting fit into the opportunity to transform how we look at these challenges? Well, on the cost side, we can bring the materials cost way down. If you imagine materials are sourced from human or animal sources right now, which are quite expensive, take a lot of processing, et cetera. So if we can bring in things like engineered proteins, engineered recombinant human proteins, et cetera, we can lower that cost and essentially build a scalable supply chain for technologies like this. We can minimize risk to patients by tailoring patient-specific solutions. We can improve outcomes, so regenerate rather than just repair, hopefully minimize that need for reoperation, maybe increase the ability to intervene early. So where previously we may have seen a defect and medically manage that until someone's ACL tears, now we can intervene early with bioprinting. Being able to be agile and responsive, so being able to use this technology to quickly pivot and address patient-specific needs. So the Vesper splitter was one of those examples. Multimodal delivery, this one is exciting for me specifically, because traditionally when you think of healthcare or medical devices or implantables, there's a manufacturing facility, a product is created, and then it's delivered to a hospital or a clinician. With bioprinting, we're really printing at physiologically relevant temperatures and pressures. So you really have the opportunity to embed some of these systems into point of care or hospital facilities. You don't need all the infrastructure that you may need with metal or polymer printing. You don't need shielding gases. You don't need big ventilation systems. A lot of the infrastructure that exists in a cell and tissue culture lab is just fine for being able to bioprint. So it really makes it easy to translate some of these into a hospital system so you have multiple avenues for delivery of these types of products. Expanded access, so in a lot of countries, human or animal tissue isn't allowed for surgical repair or surgical use. And so some of these regenerative types of products are not available to certain patients. So by being able to manufacture and distribute a product that isn't human or animal derived or is that engineered specifically, we can expand access into some of these regions that currently don't allow these types of products. And then obviously ultra personalization, which I won't belabor at this point. So again, what our mantra at J&J is to put the patients first. Really the patient is the North Star of everything that we do. And so everything that we think about on my team and everything that we're working towards on my team really is to change the trajectory of health for humanity. And we at J&J really feel that 3D printing and technologies like bioprinting will make that possible.